Order, please. The whips are satisfied. Order, please. Orders of the day or questions put by members. Question period will begin at 1:05 and end at 2:05. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is going to be to the Minister responsible for the Advisory Council on the Status of Women. The Minister responsible announced recently Canada's first ever nonpartisan campaign school for women to be held next month in Halifax. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is a great idea. Unfortunately, the registration fee is $395. There is no assistance for transportation or accommodation, and the participants must provide their own child care or senior care. And it would appear, Mr. Speaker, that the financial pressure that keeps most women out of politics in the first place will also keep them out of this workshop. So my question for the Minister is this: why is the participation in this nonpartisan campaign school limited to those who have the greatest financial resources?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Status of Women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a campaign school that is put on as a direct result of several workshops that were held throughout the province. It's in response to those people that participated and to encourage more women to run for elected office. The Advisory Council on the Status of Women has set up a committee of 3 independent people that will choose those 30 individuals who will be eligible to come. And the Status of Women is also providing sponsorship for 5 individuals who apply, and those individuals will be chosen by the 3 individuals who are picking the 30 to come. So there are 5 scholarships available or entrance fees available for this campaign school.
The Honourable Leader of Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the Minister is totally missing the point. There are only 30 spots available in this process in any event. The bursaries that are available don't cover the costs. So, Mr. Speaker, women from the African Nova Scotian community, the Aboriginal community, single parents and family caregivers all run a significantly higher risk of living in poverty. Now, we need the voices of these women in politics, yet they are exactly the women to whom this workshop will not be accessible. So I want to ask the Minister, how is a $395 workshop going to address the underrepresentation of women at all elected levels of government in this province?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Status of Women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, this campaign school is a bargain. There is another campaign school that is held on the west coast of this country that is far more expensive. This campaign school is intended for individuals who have already made the commitment to run for political office. They've already made a commitment to either run municipally, provincially, or federally, or for First Nations. It's to give them firsthand the information as to what to expect in media scrums, as to the one-on-one interviews, as to what it takes to run an effective campaign, and everything involved with the actual running. But for those individuals who have already made the commitment.
The Honourable Leader of Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, I believe, Mr. Speaker, the campaign school to which the Minister responds is the one in BC that she went to, and the people of Nova Scotia paid her way, Mr. Speaker. Municipal politics is the most accessible level of public service, and it is often, Mr. Speaker, the entry point for women interested in politics. This campaign school is either several months too late or 4 years too early to help women run for local government. So my final question to the Minister is this: will you ensure that the Advisory Council on the Status of Women has the resources to ensure that this nonpartisan campaign school is actually accessible to all women?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Status of Women.
Mr. Speaker, the comment was made that we're either early or 4 years, we're 4 years early or too late. The timing is perfect. You don't plan to run an election campaign overnight. You need to plan for these things. This is an opportunity for women to get the expertise that they need to run an effective campaign.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Titan Park.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister responsible for the Gaming Control Act. Mr. Speaker, having participated in the Problem Gaming Conference, an international event being held in Halifax this week, it's clear to me, as it should be to the Government of Nova Scotia, that problem gaming is causing severe hardship for Nova Scotia families. And as public officials, it's incumbent upon us to address this very serious problem. My question for the Minister is this, Mr. Speaker. Has the Minister taken the time to hear what the experts are saying? And if so, what measures will he personally take to fight gambling addictions?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in response to the member's question, yes, I have been following the proceedings at the conference. Indeed, people from Office of Health Promotion and the Gaming Corporation are there and have made presentation. The honourable member will know that, having attended those sessions. And certainly, we are taking the information from this conference as we are taking the information from our public participation process that we're doing to bring that all together and consider all of those items.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park, on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the Minister when he says he's concerned about the problems facing the families of problem gamblers. But I'm not convinced that the proper programs are in place. For example, the $4 million fund specifically designated to combat gaming addictions is simply sitting idle, earning interest. My question for the Minister is, will the Minister commit to using the $4 million to design and develop effective treatment programs for gaming addicts?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And what we do make the commitment to is to listen to Nova Scotians through the process of the process that we're going through now, to hear what people are saying, to look at the issues around. When we have done that, Mr. Speaker, we'll be able to look and determine which directions we need to move. We're aware that there's, the Gaming Corporation puts money in the foundation each year. That's part of the program towards responsible gambling, the commitment that we've made. Mr. Speaker, we are looking at all of the issues. We will hear what people have to say, and then we will decide how we will go forward.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park, on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, there are many, many dollars sitting idle right now while people are suffering in our province, and those monies could be put to good use right now to help people. We in the Liberal caucus believe that a comprehensive strategy must be developed in consultation with multiple stakeholders without undue delay. My final question to the Premier is, will the Premier immediately strike a select committee on gambling addictions to hold province-wide public hearings and to design a comprehensive addiction program?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite shares the government's concern about problem gambling. The discussion paper has generated a tremendous amount of interest, which is very appropriate. It is a very serious problem. But the government believes that the course that we are traveling with regulated gambling is the right one. As a matter of fact, it was endorsed at the conference earlier by Ralph Nader, who indicated that gambling must be regulated by government. What the discussion paper will allow us to do is to regulate better.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, the reality is the way this government is dealing with problem gambling is rotten. When this government set out to develop a strategy, they started with a discussion paper that even the experts call hollow and without substance. The Minister of Finance put the Gaming Corporation, the same group that promotes gambling in Nova Scotia, in charge of collecting the information, which is an obvious conflict, Mr. Speaker. The result is they refuse to hold public meetings. They tell the experts that they can attend the closed-door meetings, but they can't answer questions, and they can't even speak, Mr. Speaker. So my question for the minister responsible for the gaming strategy is a very straightforward one. Did you provide any direction in what should or should not be included in the new directions discussion paper?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I interpret his question to mean, did I personally get involved in designing the program as to how we were going to go forward in the process? That program was developed, as we've indicated, by the Department of Health Promotion and the Gaming Corporation. They've been very public in their announcements. They have made press conferences in that and so how they were going to move forward. Mr. Speaker, it's been a very open process for people to make comments, and that's what we're doing, inviting people's comments.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
An open process, Mr. Speaker, that includes closed-door meetings where the public can't even attend. I'd like to table the annual report of the Gambling Addiction Helpline because I'm not sure if the minister has read it. 6 people run the 24-hour helpline last year. They received more than 3,000 calls. They received calls from gamblers, from family members, and from people looking for information. Here's what the annual report says. 95% of the gamblers who called were struggling with VLT addictions. Almost a third of them have been struggling for more than 7 years. Most of the gamblers who phoned spent over $1,000 a month, and 31% of the gamblers had lost between $10,000 and $20,000, Mr. Speaker. So my question for the minister is this. It's clear that we need a real gaming strategy for Nova Scotia, so why won't you start a real discussion with Nova Scotians and start holding public meetings right away?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member has indicated some of the statistics, some of the concerns that people have had throughout this province, indeed some of the concerns that the Gaming Corporation has, some of the concerns Office of Health Promotion has, and indeed we hear people at the conferences talking about these issues. Mr. Speaker, that's why we've undertaken the process, so we can look at these problems, we can look at the issues, and we can set directions that will take care of those issues.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, last year, the province made $175 million from gambling. This government spent just $3 million of that to help people who are devastated by this addiction and their families. Now the province is holding closed-door meetings, inviting who they like, and telling the experts to be quiet. So my question for the minister is this. How do you expect anyone to believe that you have any plan to help those gamblers in this province who are affected with this addiction?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the Leader of the Opposition indicates that we are not prepared to hear people listen. Mr. Speaker, I just want to read the final paragraph from the letter that the honourable member tabled last week. It was from the addiction services people from the district health councils. Their last sentence in that letter says, "Thank you for the opportunity to provide input into this process, Mr. Speaker." That's what they said.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's nothing quite like question period for things to be taken and quoted out of context. So let's start first, if I could, with the Premier's comments about Mr. Nader yesterday when he attended that conference. Mr. Nader said that the gambling of the type that is described in Nova Scotia doesn't touch on human ability. It results in social decay, that there's no redeeming, socially constructive goals to this. Those comments that the Premier made a few moments ago would have been in context if one of his elected ministers had bothered to attend the conference in the first place. My question for the Premier, why was there not a minister there then or now?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad the member opposite made reference to the conference. He was suggesting that in some way I may have been confused about what Mr. Nader said. I'd like to read to the members of the House what Mr. Nader said. Mr. Nader said, "But governments that run gambling operations also have the chance to regulate a more responsible system." And that's what's going on now through the discussion paper. Again, I quote, "It's better than trying to prohibit it because then it goes underground and creates organized criminals. It is better for the state to monopolize it because otherwise you'll have Trumps," and he's referring to Donald Trump's, "and otherwise we will have out-of-control gambling machines." So I believe we're moving in the right direction towards responsible gambling.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel on your first supplementary.
Again, Mr. Speaker, if the Premier or one of his ministers had bothered to go a half-mile down the road, they would have had the full context of what was being provided by Mr. Nader. It's absolutely clear that this was damning. What he was saying is that this is a scourge on society. It's obvious that this needs to be regulated, that gaming in some fashion is going to continue to happen. The question is whether or not somebody is going to take it seriously. So on the question of context, I go back to the answer provided a moment ago by the Minister of Finance, where he's quoting from the letter that was tabled by the Leader of the Official Opposition last week. But what seems to be missing, for example, is from page, I think it's 4 of that document, where it clearly states that the number of VLTs, since the hollow comments in last spring's sitting, the number of VLTs in Nova Scotia has risen by 500 just in the last several months. 500, that's over 10%. My question for the Minister of Finance is whether or not he is prepared to state before this House that the number of VLTs in this province is growing as we sit here on reserve circumstances.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Okay, that's me.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the member brings up the discussion that we had last spring. What I think the member's question was, are the number of VLTs growing on First Nation lands? And the answer is yes. Those have, under the agreements that the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs indicated last year, there was agreements that those would grow. So yes, there is some growth in VLTs in those circumstances.
The Honourable Member of Halifax Citadel on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It does bring us back to the spring dialogue with respect to this in question period when the Premier reaffirmed his commitment to the bill that he tabled just 6 years ago. And last week he said he wishes that we didn't have VLTs in this province. My question to the Premier, 6 years ago you were prepared to put a moratorium on the growth of VLTs in this province. In the last several months it's grown by 500. What happened to your moratorium?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I did take advantage of our position in minority government to bring forward a bill that limited the number of video lottery terminals in Nova Scotia. We were able to convince the government of the day that it was a good bill, and this House passed the bill. However, the bill does not apply to machines that are part of the Reserve Nation infrastructure.
The Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Education. Last week, I learned of a man who pled guilty to possession of child pornography and continued to work as a school photographer in the Annapolis Valley. And no one said a word. Even more distressing, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that this man's spouse works for the Department of Education, and part of her job is to prepare training material for school boards on their obligation to report threats to students' well-being and health. Yet a Department of Education spokesperson has said staff aren't legally bound to report this kind of situation. To me, Mr. Speaker, there's something wrong about that. My question to the minister is, what direction does your department give to staff to report abuse, mistreatment, or exploitation of children, or anyone else working with children?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, our staff is bound by the same rules and regulations and statutes that would govern any member of this legislature or citizens at large.
Now, Member Timberley Prospect on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, during my teaching career, I lived by the motto, you always put the kids first. What we need here, Mr. Speaker, is common sense, not legalese about what staff are or are not obligated to report. This is a clear moral issue. There is an international war on against child pornography because it revolves around the completely unacceptable exploitation of children. So I want to know from the Minister of Education, what are you doing to fix the obvious gaps with policies, practices, and processes concerning the protection of children when people in your department do not come forward?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
I guess it's a very poor analogy, and I'm reluctant to use it, but I'm really not sure how to answer it. Then the Child Abuse Register is for people who are gainfully employed by school boards and other youth organizations. But I guess if we were trying to do the comparison, and I discussed this legally, to be quite frank, with my colleagues to try and get an opinion on it, and you know, we had a situation in this legislature a number of years ago, a very unfortunate situation, which saw a member leave a particular party. And in some ways, although this is schools, the other thing was public policy, it would be like naming that person's wife, or because somebody did something.
Now, Member Timberley Prospect, on your final supplementary.
Speaker, we're talking about the most vulnerable people in our society. We're talking about our children and keeping them safe in public and private institutions. I'd like to go to the Premier, if I may. Mr. Premier, when you look at the standards set out in the Child and Family Services Act, the definition of abuse is clearly inadequate, in my opinion. Parents have been coming up to me over the last few days asking how this situation in the Valley could possibly take place. How could this be allowed to happen? And I think those are pretty fair questions. I would assume the Premier agrees with me on this. So, Mr. Premier, what action are you prepared to take to address this fundamental issue about protecting our children in our schools in this province?
Now will the Premier.
I refer that to the minister responsible.
Now, Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, there's no question it's a sensitive issue that the honourable member has raised, and in response to that, as I indicated in the answer to the previous questions, I did consult people to give me legal advice, but the other thing is that we are currently reviewing our policies in the department to see what might be possible to prevent such recurrence.
Halifax Citadel.
Mr. Speaker, in answer to the last question, the Premier conceded that the number of VLTs in the province has grown despite his intention to put a moratorium on, perhaps suggesting that he doesn't have jurisdiction over non-reserve situations when it is absolutely clear with respect to the administration of VLTs, this is a responsibility that this province has some authority to help regulate. I'm going to table a paper that was put before the International Problem Gambling Conference earlier this morning by Dr. John McMullen and Dr. David Perrier, Mr. Speaker. This was a paper that was done in Nova Scotia for Nova Scotians and for other Canadians at an international conference. And these are the findings that come from this paper. It says that lower income households, I'm on page 4, are overrepresented in the top gambling expenditure quantiles, and they spend a larger proportion of their income on gambling products than do other household income groups. And on page 6, it says gamblers in the lowest educational household groups gamble more intensely. My question for the Premier is, what is he doing to help those economically and educationally disadvantaged when it comes to VLT addiction?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I need a clarification of the question, because I thought the member opposite was asking a question as it related to the practices on First Nation reserves, and then the question seemed to come out as if it was a general question. I will answer the general question in that we are proceeding with the discussion paper to allow the government to come to conclusions that will make our responses to the gambling issue more effective. If the member has a question that he wants to direct as to the policy on First Nation lands, he would perhaps be well advised to direct it to the minister responsible.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will clarify a part of what I had referenced earlier because it frankly relates to the second part of my question. The first part related to a report that was released this morning that suggested that the problems of gambling are greater amongst the economically and educationally disadvantaged. What are you doing about that? It turns out that this report, again, Mr. Speaker, and I'm referring to page 10 of that of this document, says that the average charitable donations are lower for households with gambling expenditures compared to those without. So what we're finding is that the gambling problem in our province is taking away from charities. My question for the Premier, what do you intend to do to help the charities when they're having their money taken by your gambling regime?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the member continues a line of questioning that allows all of us to conclude that it is a very serious problem. But what I can say regarding the issue of charities, if you look at the record of Nova Scotians and the contributions they make to charities, we are among the leaders in the country, and it's something about which we can be very, very proud.
Halifax Citadel, on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that when it comes to the talk of this being a serious issue, it's all clear, but when it comes to the actions, it's something different. Again, referring to the paper that was tabled just this morning, page 9, it also indicates that seniors, vulnerable seniors in this province, are having their RRSPs taken because they, to a greater extent, are using up their life savings in order to gamble. So my question for the Premier, what are you doing for seniors who are disproportionately using up their RRSP savings in order to gamble in our province?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much. I refer to that to the Minister of Health Promotion.
The Honourable Minister responsible for Health Promotion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the member. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is, what the member is really pointing out is that there are many views coming forward with respect to this conference. The whole idea, Mr. Speaker, of the conference is to hear those views and to have the opportunity for people coming from a variety of different aspects to bring those views forward. But, Mr. Speaker, I'll point out one view that was from a national gaming critic, Mr. Speaker, and I'll quote Saul Boxenbaum from Montreal. As a gambling critic and consumer advocate in issues relating to gambling, I monitor gambling issues and news across Canada and the United States. I must commend the Nova Scotia Gaming Corp and the Office of Health Promotion for the steps they are taking to curb problem gambling. I believe the Nova Scotia government is leading the way in attempts to minimize the dangers created by expanding gambling. I am appalled, however, by the comments made by NDP MLA Bill Esterbrook and Liberal MLA Diana Whalen. And it goes on to say, Mr. Speaker, and I'll table that, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please. Just remind all members not to mention other members' names in the House by their constituencies. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is the Minister responsible for workers' compensation. Mr. Speaker, in this province, many small and medium-sized business are shouldering the burden of higher insurance costs and from unfair taxes like the business occupancy tax, Mr. Speaker. They can ill afford any additional costs, and that's why many are shaking their heads at the hike in WCB premiums just recently announced, Mr. Speaker. But not all businesses have to shoulder that cost, Mr. Speaker. One of the large, newer employers in this province is call centres, Mr. Speaker, and many are exempt. So I want to ask the Minister responsible for WCB, what call centres are exempt, and why are they?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's not information that I have right at my fingertips, but I'll make it available to the member opposite.
Now, member Cape Breton Centre on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there was a double-barrel shot there, and he didn't know either one. But, Mr. Speaker, this speaks to basic fairness of what's going on at WCB. This minister gives his blessing to a fee increase, a rate hike increase, but doesn't know who's paying it and who's paying what, Mr. Speaker. Staff at WCB say the reason that there is no policy in place with call centers is because the industry is new, Mr. Speaker, because the industry is new. That's pretty darn silly, Mr. Speaker. So I want to ask again, why is your government making homegrown industries pay rate hikes at WCB and exempting call centers?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important to point out that the Workers' Compensation Board is an insurance company that looks at the costs that it takes to run their business, and through their board of directors, they will put in price increases from time to time or assessment increases, and that's not something that is passed to the government for our approval or disapproval. That's something that the board has the ability to do.
Member Cape Breton Centre on your final supplementary.
There's nowhere in regulation where these employers are exempt, but seems like the minister is happy to go along with this. He's all right with our small businesses that are overburdened and can barely compete in any markets, let alone local or international, but he can turn a blind eye to these international companies. Mr. Speaker, this is the same province that over a year ago had chronic pain legislation overturned, and this government has done nothing on it. So why is this minister allowed chronic pain sufferers to continue to suffer and allowing these large multinational companies, such as call centers, to not pay their fair share? Why is that, Minister?
Minister of Environment, Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the one thing that bears pointing out here is that we do look at risk, and risk is a factor with regards to determining these types of things. I worked in an industry where there was considerable risk, and it was certainly covered by the Workers' Compensation Board, as the member opposite would know. However, with some of the call centers and the industries that he's talking about, the risk has been assessed and has been assessed as minimal.
Member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, in the latter part of August, the Department of Health sent out letters to residents of nursing homes which outlined how residents will pay for room and board come January 1st. In this letter it states, and I quote, "No more than 85% of your income will go towards room and board costs." Mr. Speaker, according to the most up-to-date information I have from the department, $65 a day is the cost figure last used for room and board. So for a senior with a $30,000 income, it's possible that they could be paying over $2,100 a month for room and board, an increase from what is charged based on that $65 a day cost figure. My question to the minister, what mechanism are you putting in place to ensure that no senior will be paying more for room and board than what is actually required to cover the cost?
Now, Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are doing a very thorough evaluation of the costs involved with respect to nursing home care as it relates to living expenses within the thing, or to separate out the health care costs. And Mr. Speaker, the figures that we come forward with are figures that will represent an average across the province, so that everyone will in fact be treated the same relative to what they are charged.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, you have to admit, when residents receive letters that state a percentage of your income will be used to pay for room and board, but you really have no idea of the cost associated, residents and families are going to begin to question whether they're paying more than they need to be. Given that nursing homes are provided global budgets from the Department of Health, and these global budgets are broken down line by line, it may also be possible for the department to authorize an increase for room and board that may not necessarily reflect the increased costs for any particular line item. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of all of the residents' nursing homes in this province, I have to ask the minister, how does the minister plan to reassure nursing home residents that the room and board rate being charged reflects the actual cost of room and board?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I indicated in answer to the first question, that is part of a very thorough analysis that is being done by the department with respect to determining the charge that will be made for seniors relative to their cost. And that is a figure, Mr. Speaker, that will be open and clearly available to everyone in this province. And it's something that will be determined very clearly, and to be it will represent an average figure, Mr. Speaker, but no two facilities are the same. So we can't have a separate number for every facility. That's not appropriate, nor is it fair. The number that we will use will be one that will represent the average cost throughout the province.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm all for openness and transparency. So if the minister is asking nursing home residents to produce proof of income, I suppose, Mr. Speaker, what we're asking this minister to produce proof that he doesn't plan to slip through the back door and have some increases in room and board costs beyond what are actually needed. The letter to the residents also stated that in the fall, residents will be informed as to what they will be required to pay for room and board. So my final question to the minister then, could the minister please confirm whether or not in that same letter that he plans to notify residents of the true room and board cost for the facility in which they live?
The honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What, in fact, we will make available to the residents is the average cost that will be charged to all residents, and all residents across the province, regardless of where they are, will in fact be paying the same amount for room and board and the service that they receive relative to that. And again, I want to point out, Mr. Speaker, that no person will be required to pay more than 85% of the income that they have available for that room and board.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is for the minister responsible for the Liquor Commission. Last week, it was revealed that the executives at the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation took home nearly $100,000 in bonuses this year just for doing their jobs. The CEO took home the largest amount, a hefty $35,000. That's the equivalent of 1,000 2/4 of Keats, Mr. Speaker. Now, I'm scratching my head like many Nova Scotians over why someone can get a bonus that's larger than, Mr. Speaker, why someone can get a bonus that's larger than the average wage in this province just to sell beer. I'm also scratching my head, Mr. Speaker, about just what these executives do to earn these extravagant bonuses. Will the minister tell this House what criteria are used to determine whether or not NSLC bigwigs get to cash in at taxpayers' expenses?
The honourable minister responsible for the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the honourable member used a brand that's produced here in Nova Scotia as an example. But beyond that, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to recognize that the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation is a corporation. It has a board of directors. It has rules governing its senior management and employees. And part of that structure, Mr. Speaker, if they meet their financial targets, they are entitled to bonuses to achieve those returns for taxpayers.
Honourable member for Cape Breton Nova, and your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, those bonuses are based on meeting the annual revenue target. I'll table emails from the NSLC verifying this, Mr. Speaker. This government has a history of ordering backdoor tax increases through the increasing prices at the Liquor Corporation. We saw that last spring when the government ordered a 9% increase in sales. This is the only agency of government where executives get bonuses when politicians demand more revenue. Will the minister tell this House how he can justify giving bonuses to the Liquor Corp executives simply because his government demands higher revenues?
The honourable minister responsible for the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I certainly assume the honourable member likes to see government services provided through health care, education, and transportation and other services. Those services are paid for paid by the revenues generated through the
order, please. The honourable minister has the floor.
Those services are paid for in part, Mr. Speaker, as all members know, by revenues in part generated through the Nova Scotia Liquor Corp. And certainly, I think it's incumbent upon us as elected officials to ensure services are there and to protect taxpayers' money, that maximum returns are achieved. And that's why qualified individuals are given bonuses if they achieve those revenues to contribute toward our health care, toward our roads, and our education.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova, and your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it seems like a double-edged sword here. We have the Office of Health Promotion opened by this government, and then they're telling Nova Scotians to drink 9% more alcohol. Earlier this year, Mr. Speaker, the NSLC apparently did an extra $3 million through a so-called price harmonization. Some would call this taxation by stealth. It seems the Nova Scotia Liquor Corp executives can get a bonus every time the government increases the price of beer. Right. When will the minister abolish the bonus bonanza at the Liquor Corp and pay people a justified salary and call it a day?
Minister responsible for Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, part of the salary is a bonus based upon achieving the financial target in the business plan. Certainly, when you look at those revenues are keenly important to providing the dollars and resources for the maintenance improvement of health care and its delivery in this province, in education, and our transportation system. I think if the honourable member checked with most Nova Scotians, they would certainly like to see those revenues maintained and increased so that those services can be increased as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Anne Hudick of Dartmouth has advanced MS and relies on help for even her most basic daily activities. Her home care services have been minimal from the beginning. Her friend, who is visually impaired, and her daughter, who is also disabled, have been expected to give her the bulk of her care. Even though she has a lift to get her in and out of the bathtub, home care workers would only give her sponge baths. I ask the minister, is this his government's idea of adequate home care?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we work very hard to achieve a standard of care for all persons who are treated by the services of the Department of Health. And that, Mr. Speaker, is very often something that people work very hard at, but certainly people want to ensure that all individuals are treated appropriately, and we strive to achieve that objective.
I will member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley, under first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, as this woman's condition worsened, she was offered fewer services. And when Ms. Hudick complained and expressed her frustration, she was deemed verbally abusive and was cut off home care. It took 10 months of negotiations, facing many unnecessary delays in meetings and phone calls to get her services restored, but they are still far less than she requires. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, clients seem to lose services easily, but appeals are difficult and lengthy while they sit without those services. How does he intend to address this situation?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is a balance that has to be achieved, and very often that balance is not achieved easily. It's the balance between the services that are to be required to patients in the province, but there's also, on the other side of the scale, the protection that healthcare workers need to receive as they carry out their duties. And the healthcare workers are very often placed in very vulnerable situations, and it's appropriate that they receive the level of protection they need. Unfortunately, when there is a difference of opinion relative to that struggle and the balance, the resolution sometimes is not found quickly or easily. But, Mr. Speaker, we do have to protect our workers, and that is one of our priorities, as well as providing the best service we can for our patients.
I'll member Dartmouth South, Portland Valley, on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the department will have more resources to spread among other people because the lack of home care, inadequate transportation, and the constant harassment by community services over disability payments are actually driving Ms. Hudick, her daughter, and her friend out of the province. They are moving to Abbotsford, British Columbia, where they will have access to transportation, greater home care, and better opportunities to participate in community activities. My question to the minister: how could your government allow services to sink to such inadequacy that people have to flee our province to get the help they need?
Shame. Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I can't comment on the decisions taken by individuals within this House, but I can remind all members of the House that we have in fact increased our spending on health care in this province over the period of the past 5 years by over $500 million, Mr. Speaker. That was not achieved easily. It was not achieved without sacrifice of my other cabinet colleagues and all of the government departments that they oversee. But, Mr. Speaker, we're committed to delivering the very best health care we can in this province. We've demonstrated our commitment to funding that level of health care. Last year, we increased the budget by over $230 million, Mr. Speaker, and we'll continue to make health care spending a priority in this province.
The honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier in question period, we were reminded again that when it comes to decisive, clear action as opposed to comforting words, this government seems to opt for the comforting words when it pertains to VLTs. That's similar to the challenges that relate to ABA therapy, and my question is for the Minister of Health. Almost 1 year ago to the day, the minister indicated he had recommendations from the Neurodevelopment Delay Committee that he would be taking ABA therapy to Cabinet, that he should. This spring, the minister in debate stated this program is a priority as soon as the federal funding was available. And in the summer of this year, he provided a letter to families who are advocating for ABA therapy to be covered, that this was a top priority. Well, the funding has arrived. The Premier has put forward a wish list of priorities, including $20 million for mental health. My simple question to the Minister of Health is whether or not ABA therapy was indeed somewhere inside that $20 million envelope.
The honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell the honourable member that the letter to which he referred is the letter that I intend to stand by.
Member for Halifax Citadel on your first supplementary.
I take that to mean that the money was part of the $20 million line item. It was never clear until just last week when this matter was raised that perhaps it was covered under mental health, but perhaps it wasn't part of the Premier's wish list that was released last month. Mr. Speaker, the Otten case is well known to this government. The BC Court of Appeal found that the government's failure to cover ABA therapy was a violation of the Charter. This matter has gone to the Supreme Court of Canada. And who intervened in a factum that said that ABA therapy should not be covered? The government of Nova Scotia. And in that factum, it said that ABA therapy was not a cure, failing to point out the broad acceptance that this is a workable solution over many decades. My question for the Minister of Health: why was the government saying one thing about its support for ABA therapy, but fighting against it at the Supreme Court of Canada?
The honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the honourable member has a far better capacity to deal with the legal questions than I do, in fact that he is a lawyer and I'm not. And very often, all persons who find themselves dealing with the courts need to say things before the courts that are appropriate to protect the larger picture of the context in which they find themselves, and is not necessarily reflective of specifics relative to what individuals are dealing with. The Speaker would understand that.
Now, member for Halifax Citadel on your final supplementary. Order. Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Halifax Citadel on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps this is a matter that can be sorted out at another time, and an opportunity that provides the government a full opportunity to provide an explanation why it seemed to be saying one thing and doing yet another. My question for the Minister of Health: he said that he would stand by his word to the families who received his letter this summer. My question is, When will they receive a concrete indication that you will stand by that word, Mr. Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would hope that it would be soon. And I'm unable to define soon, Mr. Speaker, but obviously I do not want to be in the position of having to answer similar questions well into the future.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the research articles I recently looked at focused on 48 individuals at 10 sites in the United States and Canada. These individuals were questioned about the environmental exposures and symptoms to sewage sludge. Primary complaints were coughing, burning throat, burning eyes, headaches. Residents developed nasal and chest congestion, fatigue, and flu-like symptoms. These are not unlike the symptoms that the residents in Lower Truro are experiencing now. Yesterday, we did learn that the farmer in Colchester has been told to stop spreading, but we're still waiting for a study on the health impacts. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Health. Minister, is your department studying the effects that the spreading of sewage sludge is having on the adults and children in Nova Scotia?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Office of the Chief Medical Officer of Health was in fact consulted or the Department of Environment, I should say, consulted with the people in the Chief Medical Officer of Health's office, and their response, broad picture, big picture response was that their judgment is that there were no health risks associated with this activity, Mr. Speaker, and that opinion was based on the best knowledge they could bring to the situation based on previous research and the body of knowledge that exists relative to the subject.
Now, Member Dartmouth East on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, but I'm not sure if the Minister understood what my question was. I'm not referring to before we started spreading, but I'm referring to what's happened since we started spreading. Mr. Speaker, U.S. federal guidelines advise wearing protective gear when handling Class B biosolids. The poor health of residents in Colchester should raise even more concerns. Residents say they have begun to show signs of sludge syndrome, burning eyes, nosebleeds, headaches, skin and throat irritation, and stomach upset. Surely a study of these reports needs to be done before any further biosolids are spread. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Health is, when is your department going to begin to study the reported illnesses and develop methods for assessing our community's exposure to these contaminants?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The professionals within the Department of Health make every effort to keep themselves current on all materials that are available relative to current subject matter, and they will do so with respect to this matter as well.
Member Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister of Environment and Labour announced he had revoked the permit at the Cotton Farm due to, I believe, odor problems. However, I believe there are still 2 other permits out there. 2 weeks ago, when the Minister called this situation in Colchester a pilot project, he said he would provide me with the test results. I haven't seen them. I want to ask the Minister of Environment and Labour, when can I expect these test results?
Hear, hear. Now, Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As of this morning, we're looking at 8 to 10 days for those test results to be available.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Finance. Last week, the Minister of Finance told the media, and I quote, "Clearly, the tax cut is one of the items on the table as we look towards starting next year's budget," unquote. That seems like a pretty definitive slip of the tongue. The original statement was crystal clear, and the about-face which followed was hasty. My question for the Minister is, have the reinstatement of tax cuts been discussed for the upcoming budget year?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I indicated last week, the budget and the items that will be discussed in the budget are off in the future. Mr. Speaker, the budget is not developed yet. When it is, we will let all the members of the legislature know.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, for the minister to even muse publicly about tax cuts is irresponsible. Healthcare needs more investment, education is grossly underfunded, and, Mr. Speaker, our crumbling roads need a massive infusion of capital. So my question to the minister is, how does the minister reconcile the contemplation of tax cuts with the need to reinvest in the real priorities of Nova Scotians?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member is questioning and debating the issue of what are all the needs that are on the table for the future. As this government has indicated, there is a demand and need for health care. There's a demand and need for education. Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of things that this government will be looking at and that they will be bringing forward. And to start now and say what will be in the budget, or to have that debate now, Mr. Speaker, they will know when the budget is tabled.
Honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's good to know that the government acknowledges the many needs facing Nova Scotians, but the government keeps teasing Nova Scotians with more loose talk about tax cuts, and that's not right. My question to the minister is, will you commit to drop the irresponsible talk of tax cuts until such time as this province can really afford it?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member, we talked about all of the demands on this government, the demands that people of this province want. We talk about the issue of the First Minister's Conference and all the items that they need to get. Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of challenges this province have. This government is looking at all those challenges, and this government will respond to the needs of the people of this province.
Now, member for Halifax, Shabakto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, two venerable education institutions on the Halifax Peninsula will soon cease to have independent existence. St. Patrick's High School and Queen Elizabeth High School are to be merged. Now, for the most part, this merger has been going along with a minimum of fuss and bother, but I want to ask the Minister of Education about one aspect of the merger that has become something of a focus among parents here. It is the problem of an auditorium for the new high school. The Department of Education says that for the new school to have an auditorium that is separate from a gymnasium, parents are going to have to do fundraising. What I would like to know from the minister is, will he tell us exactly what dollar amount he expects Halifax Peninsula families to raise for this purpose?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, the auditorium would fall into the category of enhancements, and a good many schools across the province, communities across the province, have provided enhancement funds, including my own community of Truro and Bible Hill and Millbrook, and the two high schools in Pictou County and the one out in South Colchester. And this is a thing, Mr. Speaker, when the tender is let and the design is completed, then a cost would be available.
Honourable member for Halifax, Shabakto on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, both of the existing high schools have auditoriums that are separate from their gymnasiums, both of them. That has been the case here for better than 50 years. So will the Minister of Education explain why his department is not prepared to pay the full replacement cost for what has been the standard design for the Halifax Peninsula high schools?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
I'm not so sure that has been the standard design for the Halifax Peninsula High Schools. As I understand, there would be 3 of those high schools that had been constructed in the last 60 years. One of them is torn down. I don't think it had an auditorium, Halifax West, if I remember correctly. Mr. Speaker, there's no question. I've been in both the auditoriums at QE and St. Pat's and attended productions and various things there, and indeed, the first public political meeting I ever went to in Halifax having to do with civic politics and the rerouting of streets when I was living up in that section of the town some number of years ago. And I can remember the mayor at that time and writing him a letter that was not complimentary after that meeting.
Order, please. Thank you. The Honourable member for Halifax, Shabakto on your final supplementary.
Well, thank you indeed, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a separate auditorium contributes to the quality the quality of education for our children. It is a place for music, for theatre, for ceremonies, and it is used as a community facility. The minister may recall that a few years ago, I explained several times to his predecessor why she was going to lose her seat. It was because she neglected the public's demand for quality in education. So will the minister tell us how many more seats his party expects to lose in the communities all over this province that value high-quality education more than he apparently does?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member from Halifax Shabakta knows that no government in recent memory has made a greater contribution to education than the one that's in power right now. We are talking $123 million for the community college. We're talking 37 new schools, not 3P, built by the people. We are talking about millions of dollars more for math, millions of dollars more for literacy. We're talking about...
Order. Order, please. Thank you. Time allotted for question period has expired. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, could I have the consent of the House to revert the order of business statements by ministers?
Is it agreed? Statements by ministers. The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every member in this House knows that we all rely heavily on many, many people to help us carry out our duties and responsibilities. Men and women who are equally committed to making life better for their fellow Nova Scotians. I say that, Mr. Speaker, because today our province lost one of those remarkable Nova Scotians. It is with deep regret and a great sense of personal loss I share the sad news that Cyril Reddy died this morning. Cyril was a personal friend to me, to many members of this House, and to countless Nova Scotians. His love of life, people, his province and politics was only outmatched by the love he had for his wife Judy, his daughters Michelle, Helen, Kathy, and son J.C. As a longtime civil servant, employed 30 years with the Department of Community Services, as five-time president of the Nova Scotia Government Employees Union, and a great fan of horse racing, he was known in practically every nook and cranny of our province. He rarely forgot a name, but if he did, he could soon recall your family tree and recite its voting history. As someone who relied on him heavily and traveled with him extensively, I will deeply miss his warmth, friendship, and advice, as I know many of you here today will. I will also deeply miss what he said practically every day of his life. It's a beautiful, beautiful Nova Scotia day. And although it is another beautiful, beautiful Nova Scotia day, it's a sad one for everyone who knew and loved Cyril. Our hearts and prayers go out to his family and his many, many friends. And Mr. Speaker, I understand that members of the opposition parties wish to comment on this statement, but I would ask, following that we would stand for a moment of silence and reflection. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I'm making this statement on behalf of our party and my leader, who is out now attending a funeral of another great Nova Scotian who passed away late last week, and that is Chester Sanford, who was former president of Nova Scotia Federation of Labour and who gave many years to this province. Mr. Speaker, on a very personal note, this is a very sad day for me also, Mr. Speaker, because I counted Cyril as one of my friends. He certainly knew how to cross political lines when friendship was involved. My first contact with Cyril when he was president of the Children's Aid Society in Cape Breton, and I was producing the Cape Breton version of Christmas Daddies, and that's where our funds would go to. And Cyril was such a strong advocate of that show and its support it gave to the children in need and the extra money that was garnered through that. And he was always so eager to lend a hand. And in another arena that the Premier spoke about was his love of horse racing. You know, I think horse racing is a tough game at the best of times, and you're mostly in it for the love and not for the money. And that's where Cyril was at. What he did at Truro Raceway was nothing less than spectacular with that industry, and he should always be remembered for that. But you know, Mr. Speaker, I think what we have to do is move away a bit from those other larger things in life, and Cyril the individual, who I think is in all of our hearts, who we would talk to out in the lobby, and he was just a good human being, Mr. Speaker. He did a lot of things for Nova Scotia, and for which a lot of us are grateful. But I think those who had the great fortune of knowing Cyril Reddy, the individual, are really saddened today. Mr. Premier, I know your connection with Cyril, and my deepest condolences personally to you and your family, but indeed to Cyril's family. And I think that they know that maybe, you know, his passing is really a blow to all of us. But, you know, I hope they will take some comfort in the words we say today and the little tribute we give him, because as much bravado as maybe Cyril would have, he was never one to run out in front of and be the leader of the train. He was the thoughtful, good person in the background. And to behalf of my party, I want to offer my condolences to the Premier and to the family, and we will certainly be sharing in a moment of silence very shortly. Thank you.
The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to echo the very kind words of the Premier and my colleague from Cape Breton Centre for a very dedicated and much loved Nova Scotian. Mr. Speaker, I had the pleasure of meeting Cyril when I was Minister of Agriculture about 10 years ago. At that time, Cyril was giving myself and Ed Lorraine the benefit of his wisdom for another of his great passion, horse racing. And while Cyril and Ed were longtime fans of horse racing, Cyril took me under his capable wing as I made a few wagers. As it turned out, Cyril and Ed made the money, while beginner's luck eluded me. As politicians, we depend on a great number of people for information, guidance, and support, and sometimes just to listen. And Cyril's contribution to government and onto the lives of all Nova Scotians won't soon be forgotten. I want to extend, on behalf of the Liberal caucus, our deepest sympathies to Cyril's wife, Judy, daughters Michelle, Helen, and Kathy, and his son, JC. The province of Nova Scotia has lost a great friend, but his legacy on our province will live on. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank all the members for their kind words and ask everyone to rise for a moment of silence in memory of our friend Cyril Reddy. Thank you. Please be seated. Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I think, Mr. Speaker, we have cleaned off the order paper, and therefore I'm going to move that the House do now rise and meet again tomorrow. Tomorrow being Opposition Day, I'd suggest, Mr. Speaker, that the leader of the Liberal Party would apprise us of the order of business for tomorrow.
Honourable Member Cape Breton South.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow the House will meet from 2 p.m. until 6 p.m. And following the order of business in question period, we'll be calling Bill number 88, Protection from Quarries Act, and also resolution number 2498. I move that we do now adjourn until 2 o'clock tomorrow.
Motion is the House adjourn until tomorrow at 2 p.m. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The House is adjourned until 2 p.m. tomorrow.